the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, representative of supreme authority, is my shepherd, Benton Shepherd. Benton shall not want. That force maketh Benton to lie down in green pastures, and it leadeth Benton beside the still waters. It restoreth Benton's soul, it leadeth Benton in the paths of righteousness for its name's sake. Yea, though Benton walks through the valley of the shadow of death, Benton will fear no evil, for the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation possible, supreme authority, is with Benton. Its rod and its staff, they comfort Benton. It prepareth a table before Benton in the presence of Benton's enemies. It anointeth Benton's head with oil. Benton's cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall continue to follow Benton all the days of his life, whatever that means. And Benton will dwell in the house of the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency forever. What's happening? Benton here. We have a live chat. Sister T, amening. Good to see you, Miss T. Miss T. All right, we're going to not read the chat. If that's okay. The Royal We has a few notes on the topic. Society of disempowered individuals. And disempowerment as a state of being within the context of delusion, within the context of waking dreams, surrealistic notions of unreality. And if anybody's curious about waking dreams, surrealistic notions of unreality, take a gander at the posts tab. I'm just going to call it community, the community tab, which is called the posts tab. Take a gander at that. And there's a picture, which I'm not exactly sure what that is. It appears to be what was originally a black and white photograph, I would assume. And two football players. And I believe that would be an all-star game from the NFL. And I'm not exactly sure, but in the olden days, a team of college all-stars would go play against the NFL champions. So going into the 1946 season, that defending champion, NFL champion, would have been the Cleveland Rams, who then moved to Los Angeles. And old number 49 there is Grandpappy, my Benton here's famous relative. And if we look at what the defender, so Benton has the ball and is number 49, Jim Benton, the famous ancestor, has his body positioned in kind of a way with like his butt sticking out a little bit, and then there's a defender, what we presume is a defender, from the all-star team, college all-star team, who's making a face, a particular kind of face with like his tongue is in the corner of his mouth, and tongue jutting out, and he appears to be gazing at the rear end of my grandfather as if that was a delicious meal, right? And I'm looking at this, and I don't, if I've seen this picture before, I'm maybe just forgotten, and it wasn't. Maybe the black and white version isn't that interesting, And I've seen a real life facsimile. I've actually seen a real life jersey. Now, certainly would have been faded by time, but it's not like the yellow was that bright. I'm almost certain the socks weren't yellow. Those would have been just regular old socks. I'm assuming maybe they were yellow. Who knows? I'm not apprised of the entirety of the uniform. But I mean, obvious psyop, right? So I saw that in just off the charts, waking dreams, surrealistic notions of unreality, as if one needs to be reminded of what this place is on some level, right? So tying all of that into the disempowerment of individuals within this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, which shows itself for what it is, hollow, void, empty, uh, but with an excellent publicist, antithesis, right? Um, the individual, again, setting aside for a moment the philosophy of solipsism, if indeed there are other beings here that are also, individuated, consciousness individuated from an indivisible force, thus proving the delusory nature of this place, because what I am, as mentioned in my own, alterations of Psalm 23, and that's certainly uh, appropriate, and that is my right. Okay, anybody that wants to assert the unerring accuracy to the word, to the written word in the English language, I'll skip that discussion if it's okay. Let's, and certainly not a Christian, and not willing to swallow that book whole, rejecting large swaths of it, certainly. Now I've forgotten why I brought up the Bible. But yes, the realm and the nature of the realm, and antithesis, that which makes an enemy of what I am, and symbolically and literally what is represented, potentially represented by Benton's performance within this delusory realm. And as each new being leaves their mother, the ones that are possessed of, in possession of, although can that properly be said to be grasped? Either way, you know, possessed of Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, right? So that same as what I know myself to be, having unlocked the achievement within the game of lies, within this world of death, of true knowledge of self/self-realization. Well, number one, how did the true knowledge of self occur? Well, a whole bunch of time, effort, energies, and focus directed towards the power center of the individual, and it's always internal. And now we're on to a location. Internal versus external is a location within delusion, within the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. What I am can never exist within time and space and location and place. Those things exist within what I am. See, an inversion. We have perhaps the first inversion of the stream. And is that not one of perhaps the greatest, so-called, from the perspective of antithesis, is that not one of the greatest weapons or tactics or mechanisms? The inversion. So here's another inversion. Supreme authority, and Benton here is not declaring himself a Kang or a king. Personally, not into the king talk, right? But what I am, being representative of supreme authority, and that's thesis, right? Highest forms of energy, quickening spirit, supreme authority, the source of all life and creation. Meanwhile, no life whatsoever can ever originate in this place, this world of death. This world is a lover of death, right? The world is the realm. The realm loves death because its design is based in the designs of antithesis, the opposite or inverse of supreme authority, source of all life and creation. So by definition, and within delusion, and there you have your waking dream, surrealistic notions of unreality, right? Only within the framework, the specific framework addressed, are these things even possible, if that's the proper term. And it all seems very real, it all seems very real. So to incarnate here, in a delusory fashion, as if it were possible to individuate and break off a little chunk of an indivisible force. And now here's Benton. Well, from the perspective of antithesis, seeking to achieve its ends and goals, whatever it's aiming at, via making an enemy of what I am, targeting Benton from the very moment that Benton left his mother's womb in a state of what? Spiritual perfection. And if the being is not equipped or qualified to represent supreme authority and spiritual perfection, at least the potential for, even in the Christian context of so-called, fallen, wicked, sinful, and all of the wretched creature type shit, even if the faintest hint of a sliver of light, that could potentially reform itself internally where its power lies. Again, back to location. Well, that's the enemy of this realm, and that will be attacked, and that will be strategized against, in all ways possible by this world of death through games of lies. That is what's happening, folks. And so, having internally bootstrapped mind, body, and spirit, unlocking the achievement, Benton here has risen to the top of a I hesitate to say mountain, the top of a trash heap in a way, called the so-called truth community. By what and how? Thoughts and ideas and quality of the structure of logic and reason and thought and argument and assertion, in a framework of making points and deducing and perceiving, right? But not in a way to lead, not in a way to create community, because now we're back to location. Where is community within delusion? Externally. Well, wait a minute. What exists externally? Disempowerment. So the individual, and I mean any individual, right? And then specifically in the case of those who may share Benton's birthright or endowment, let's get our heads out of the gutter, and who shares that, well, the path to the external location in choosing freely to be led and guided and cajoled and incentivized and gaslit and attacked in various ways by the realm itself on behalf of antithesis and Moloch's machine, to move away from the power of the internal, again, a location, into the disempowerment of the external, once again, a location, and to do it in a way that humanity seemingly finds appealing, seemingly. Although I'm going to perhaps have a go at that concept, to create community. And shout out to our boy Razvan, at RAZVANN220 on YouTube. And I hesitated. I was going to share his most recent video, but in the interest of not attaching myself to any sort of potential ongoing conflict, because remember, what I am has not the capability to create friction or conflict. Although Benton, when improperly identified, outside of himself and what he knows himself to be, certainly is capable of that. But it was an interesting video, and some of today's discourse will tie into that video, because I listened to it just before, within 45 minutes of starting the stream, and then made some notes. Already had the theme for the stream yesterday, at least the title and the thumbnail. So yes, mankind's desire for community, and then, in the past, based on official fiction, taught and told that, well, yes, in the past, based on what is known of history, this would have been way more, necessary in the past, potentially. And then now, seemingly, some of this access to community has been removed, although I'm not sure that's the case, because how can we know, the royal we know, what was community like in the past? Well, in here, an inverted realm, it's implied, and then it's easy for the being to assume that, well, it must have been lovely and wonderful. It was tribal. People loved one another. They cared for one another. Okay, if that's the case, then how have the wheels come off to the extent of what's going on in 2025? How could a prop and would that not represent proper society in the past? Was it via so-called temptation? Right. See, I reject this notion of humans externally going away from their source of power, clicking up with one another, and everything being hunky dory because it was olden times. Right. I'm calling bullshit. I'm calling bullshit. Now, the differences of today perhaps lie in the technology, facilitating people, if they want to choose to stay the fuck away from other people, it's and maybe have some measure of interaction online, right? It's a pseudo community, right? A pseudo community, pseudo socialization, and um, efforts towards separating oneself from social isolation. But then what do we have now? Benton walking down the street, and there's somebody has affixed a piece of paper to a power pole, and it says, are you dating an AI? Basically. And I guess they want a QR code to be scanned. Maybe they want to get some feedback, although they're probably selling something. Right. And this is now already, look at how quickly it's become commonplace for certain individuals. And this will only ever grow over time. And again, in the initial stages is the propaganda machine contained within Moloch's machine, right? Is the gear of Moloch's machine that is in charge of propaganda. Is it on the front end? Well, really, there's not that many people dating AI and using AI as a therapist, right? Chatbots. But when the idea is out there that other folks are actually doing this, something Benton has noted in the past is that whatever the new thing is, the masses, 80%, 75%, whatever that is, they immediately just rush headlong towards it, whatever it is, whether it's TikTok, you know, um, various forms of social media to show, again, the graven image to uphold before Moloch, uh, to get the attaboys and the pat on the head and the pats on the back and acclaim, again, externally, away from the power center. And in some way, cursing one's own blessing by acknowledging a world of death and games of lies, even having the possibility for power, right? Because we're speaking contextually, like what is the idea of principalities and all of these things. Well, what's the relevance of that, right? Of what relevance is that? Well, it's going to be contextual. Meanwhile, the powers that be, have set up all of these various entities and structures, banking, government, corporations, business, right? Business transactions, so that the being will in some way perform, right? Within delusion, giving a performance. And, how much of the individual's societal acceptance externally, once again, in a disempowered fashion. So to go out to first remove oneself from their own source of power. That's job number one for antithesis. What needs to happen to preclude and ensure that individuals remain in the externalities of a delusory realm, away from their own source of power? See, an obsessive, maniacal, just fixation on the part of this realm, and that is the most frequent and immediate attack in my experience. And sadly, it's much of the time, from my experience in the recent past, it's been individuals within a so-called truth community. The ostensibly the seekers of truth, right? Who don't know a damn thing about it, and that's okay. And that's not even correct. I can't even say that they, air quotes, don't know a damn thing about it. That's some of Benton's own resentments burbling to the surface. See the internalization versus the externalization, projecting the consciousness for a fleeting moment into the external. What does that lead to? In the case of what just happened here, that leads to one moment of improper identification, leading to the tissues and the observable internal space, which is becoming only even more sensitive over time, right? The transforming of the heart and all of these things, to then, hey, here's your sign, sir, that that's not the correct path. And then again, some of the, remaining, unresolved resentments, saying, oh, look, this is our jam, this is our frequency. He's just done the thing, to temporarily allow himself to experience resentment. So let's get up out of here. So it actually works in conjunction with the healing. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? A process of unrepression, if that's a correct way to think about that. Let's see what the chat's doing. Gen 2 gone. I see you down there. Much appreciated to see you. Always appreciate seeing Miss Jen around. Shout out to Uncle Rick and OTW News in the house. OTW Live, out of this world. So let's take a look at the notes, since I hit a bit of a stopping point there. And the realm is also set up to, well, let's go back to the idea of a representation. So the realm and the propaganda, I mentioned this, the gear of Moloch's machine involved with propaganda, and then the child, if this is a thing, certainly is in my case, leaving the mother's womb in a state of spiritual perfection. And then that's what this place makes its enemy, is that spiritual perfection, right? Because that would be the thesis, right? That's the proposition, is that there is a supreme authority, a force of supreme authority, the source of all life and creation, and it has nothing to do with this place. And that's not even the correct way to say that. The relevance is that this place exists at the level of delusion, whereby antithesis, and I've used the book of Job, particularly Job chapter 1, as sort of a shorthand to understand some of these concepts, but in some way to be offered up, right? Or more correctly, what I am cannot fear what its inverse or opposite, represented by antithesis. The thesis and the thesis and proposition, it does not have the characteristics that would allow it to fear anything that antithesis could suggest, because there's nothing that antithesis can suggest that can possibly threaten or represent a threat to the supreme authority of the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency. And that's why antithesis says love conquers all. Well, no, it doesn't. Love doesn't know what it means to conquer, right? So when that's an inversion. When the royal we hears love conquers all, that's because antithesis can never truly experience or understand, right, that force, because it is contained. The antithesis is the inverse of all of those qualities. It's the lack of the experience of love, right? In fact, it's lack itself. So of course, one of the many lies that's repeated, especially with new agey types, but also in the so-called truth community, and as individuals become so disillusioned with what's happening in this place, and why are they disillusioned? Because they're taking it too seriously. Why so serious? As Benton used to take it too seriously, and still does at times, and that is part of the so-called human condition, right? I'm as good or as bad as any of the rest of you. Old Benton here is, right? And so the goal of antithesis is to disprove the validity and authority of the supreme, right, by means of coercing and convincing and tricking through these propaganda campaigns and psychologies and expectation and belief systems and ideologies and psychological warfare, right, and trauma and mind control, that the being, endowed with, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, and what that would represent, that the being would be taught from day one how to treat blessing itself, because blessing would not that not be blessing itself? What would be performed by the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation possible? That's innumerable, perpetual, never-ending blessing, unfolding, ever expanding, ever growing, right? Always in flow, always moving, manifesting truth, blessing itself, folks, right? So the realm is set up to do many things, and one of the most foremost would be that to train the individual to treat the internal space as a curse, when the internal space could represent blessing, or more properly is within delusion, right? And this is where it gets a little tricky, but at least the potential is there within the individual to embrace and to learn to get out of one's own way. And while every step of the way, this place is set up to attack and prevent the being from doing these things, to uncover, to move enough of the bullshit out of the internal space to find out, well, what exactly is going on in there in the internal. That's most of what's happening here, is to keep the individual from ever discovering the great power that may very well lie within. See, and this is not again, we're not creating a movement or a cult. We aren't doing anything. The royal we is doing what the royal we does. But see, there's already not a group. Well, what do humans want to do? Well, humans have been trained to go into a location called the external realm, right? Which is everything outside of the individual's internal space, the sphere of influence, the energy sphere, right? However we want to call that. It's always go to group up with other people. See, and then we have the church who will say, yeah, well, where two or more are gathered in my name. Well, that doesn't mean human beings in a low state of spiritual evolution coming together in a physical location. That isn't even a physical location under an organization. See, that's to be entrapped. That's to be ensnared by the enemy, right there. And again, what I am doesn't make enemies. Antithesis makes an enemy of what I am. See, there's another inversion and distinction. See, and very recently, or somewhat recently, Benton here was still viewing it as, Benton's enemy is Satan or antithesis or whatever, whatever that, evil itself. And then that must be assertively and aggressively, assertion, aggression, dominance through the yang form to destroy that. Well, no, that's not the case. Again, the inverse. Interesting. Let me slow it down a little bit. And so the idea of cursing the blessing, and then, again, I'm not into the king concept, but if we look at enslavement or the being as a slave, well, look at the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. This whole place is set up to do what? Well, you start at the bottom and you work your way to the top economically. I mean, isn't that the notion? But of course, some people are born into wealth and privilege and social status, right? As Benton was. Now, not true wealth. Benton was born into relative affluence and was not in control of the relative affluence. In fact, grew up, other than the necessities, which were, perhaps, a nicer home, nicer cars than most of my peers, right? But other than that, there really wasn't that much of a difference. I sidetracked myself a little bit there. Apologies. We'll get back to it. And sort of going through the history of the individual, and then taught from an early age. So assuming the person's not born into, I was talking about how I would have had social connections. Benton, because of, again, the aforementioned famous grandfather, there was a path to going into what, and really what we're talking about is it's a path to going into being used by Moloch's machine for Moloch's machine's own purposes, right? To make a mockery of oneself, which my grandfather must have done in some type of way to end up, if that's really him in that picture, right? And that's what he looked like. That was his football number. That's his physical frame, right? I realized I got my grandfather's hips and I got his hands, right? And he was known for, back then being able to juke and fake. Because remember, it was all white boys. 46 was the first season they brought back a couple of black folks to play in the NFL. So it was, wasn't a lot of juking and jiving. But my grandfather was known for, being able to do a little bit of fakery, right, on the football field. And as we know, NFL, certainly American football, traces its origins to Freemasonry. Of course it does. And my own father quoted his father, my grandfather, as apparently the two of them attended the funeral of a fellow NFL player from Arkansas. I believe it was Red Hickey, if I'm remembering correctly. That's an interesting name, Red Hickey. I just now realized that hickeys are typically red. Again, now, okay, waking dreams, surrealistic notions of unreality yet again, but maybe that's why they called him red. I don't know. Trying to keep the old mind out of the gutter here. Well, and succeeding, I must say. Um, and after the funeral, my grandfather apparently remarked to my father that was a Rosicrucian ceremony or funeral. And then in typical Benton fashion, just my father not following up with any questions. And I've noticed that old Benton here has that, just here's some shit that really probably bears further investigation, and just has no, just, oh, okay. Right. Well, that's interesting. Moving on to the next thing, not quite sure why that is. I guess, just sort of too cool for school, above it all in a way. Whatever. But yeah, so, is this some of the reasons that old Benton here, your broadcaster, was not interested in, or was not attracted to, and probably some of it is the undiagnosed fake autism and so-called neurodivergence. But, why was your broadcaster not interested in pursuing some kind of path, which apparently leads to serving the purposes of the system in some way, right? Lest we forget, on 11/22 of 1945, 10 catches, 303 yards, an NFL record that stood for however many years. And in fact, I'm pretty sure broke the previous record that was set in like 1933 or whatever. It's all that's the 33 code, all over the place, of course. And just how mundane that's become. Here's your sign. College number 33, of course, at Arkansas. And, I won't even go through the whole thing, but there's way more tie-ins to the potential for the secret societies and such, right? And not even that my grandfather certainly wasn't rewarded with great wealth. It was, is there something in the bloodline? But again, a bloodline's not even real. But is there something in the, the idea of a bloodline, right? And then what's different about old Benton here, your broadcasters? These are mysteries to uncover, or not. But certainly showing that there perhaps would have been a path to your broadcaster having, an easy time, and to be able to live in relative ease and comfort with income and connections and a network of people, right? And all of this, choosing in some way to turn Benton's back on that, right? Yeah, exactly. To not pursue nepotism, and some of that, just through my own obliviousness, certainly. But that's all right. Let's see. Taking a look at the notes. Bear with me. So back to the king versus the and the way I got to the concept of a king, because I'm not thinking about kings, is this the inverted realm wants to treat what it might view as something that is a kingly, a kingly fashion, or something that is kingly, or again, supreme authority on some level would be a king, right? Or at least the same level, right? That's supposedly the highest level. Some may say, well, there's emperor or whatever. Okay, well, that's fine, but let's just say king is the top of the heap. So again, to invert that, it's to treat what may have the potential to express in a kingly fashion, to treat it as if it's a slave. And how is that done? It's done through money and finance, as recognized and acknowledged in the Bible. The notion of cannot serve two masters, and then specifically giving the example of serving money, right? So that's to serve this world. And meanwhile, who's the first person to remind any of us of our duties as good little American slaves to go out and produce for economy, right? And I do want to get into some economics, since that's the so-called economy. In this economy is certainly a big topic, as it always is. Through the necessities of daily death in this world of death. Peace and respect, Benton and chat. Good to see you, Mr. Moore. As always. Okay, back to no reading of the comments. So again, to treat what could represent a king, that level, right? The most powerful chess piece, right? In a chess game, the king, that's how the game is won or lost, is whose king gets captured, right? So antithesis says, well, I've got all of these potential kings, leaving all of these wombs, all of these mothers' wombs, and let the games of lies begin within the world of death, and let's indoctrinate and teach these little babies after they've been sacrificed to Moloch, industrial and post-industrial society, and let's enslave them to various systems of government, finance, banking, right? Benito Mussolini's concept of the state, property of the state, right? Born into a vacuous, illusory adversarial realm of business transactions, and to be the property of that, as if it were possible for anyone or anything to possess the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency. That can't be possessed. It's always expanding. It's always changing. It's always evolving. It's always in flow. Right? And I don't even know that's always changing. That was perhaps Benton misspoke there. Right? It's never not growing and expanding and doing its thing based on its own nature. Right? It can't be contained within a delusion. A delusion can be contained within it, though. So now we're off to location, space, time, location. However, I thought I found a cutesy way of saying that. Apparently not. And I could tell it's going to be, I can't say a challenging day, but it's been a bit of a challenging morning. Some of that is the physicality of, various bodily processes, such as really, instead of starting the stream, what Benton probably needed to do was reschedule the start for later, and then just lay here and relax until it's time to go for the morning bathroom break. But that's okay. I certainly, it's not every day that happens on a schedule that will also fit in with the live stream, and that's fine. But there's what does science say and all of these things? More and more talk about gut health and the gut biome, and the other than the brain, the most intelligence in the body supposedly is in the intestines, and effects on mood, and seemingly affecting everything. So Benton is under some of those effects, and probably for the better, right? Probably a continuation of the great healing that Benton has received and continues to receive. And without revealing too much, because I don't want to get into potentially creating, again, what I am doesn't create friction or contention or um, any sort of disagreement. Well, disagreement might not be the correct term, but doesn't create conflict or well, can't say controversy because that's also a matter of perspective and contextual, within what context. But all right, that's enough disclaimers. um Razvans with two N's, at Razvan 220. And I have no idea what YouTube channel this clip came from, but hearing uh, the way in which some folks in the so-called truth community are now speaking, I have thoughts on that. It's hard to talk about. I've already kind of forgotten the point I wanted to address. So one moment, let me back up a little bit here. Enslaved to these systems is what I was talking about. And then, but then the desire within the individual, for community, yes. Also, improvement of conditions, right? Contextual, within context, to see conditions improve, or at least to not become worse in the short term, or at least to see conditions begin to become less bad. And then, a point of stasis can be reached and cross over into, okay, now conditions are becoming better, right? Now, the individual is trained to only think about this in one context or in one form, and that's the external, which is the idea of be the change you want to see in the world, or it's the idea of make the world a better place, which isn't even possible because, again, these are all externalities where the individual is disempowered. And what is society? What is it to be apparently forcibly, um, and this does run contrary to some of the notions around free will. Well, it's apparently no choice other than to participate in society, right? So a being endowed with true free will within this delusory realm, would not the being have the opportunity to exist, outside of the context of society? Well, that doesn't seem to be possible, or maybe it is, and I'm just not there yet. In some ways, Benton here is the vanguard, the bleeding edge, at least for a small group of folks in a so-called truth community of, always pushing the envelope, no matter what. Always pushing. And again, can there be examples found when Benton, for a period of time, was doing like everybody else and engaging in drama? And yeah, sure, of course. But I mean, overall on a progression, pushing the envelope. And don't need credit for that. Don't expect credit for that. It is what it is. It is what seemingly is happening. So the individuals, in seeking to improve their condition, right, and maybe possessed of a desire to see better conditions for others as well. But here's the thing is, if the being is unable to go into their source of power and to make that a better place, if we're talking about time, space, location, place, well, okay, prove that the being has what it takes to do that inside of themselves first. Seems to make more sense than going into externalities and joining a herd or a group and then standing around looking at each other and saying, okay, well, what's the plan for, reformation and cleaning up and sweeping up this place and making it less, dirty and less filthy, as I saw a couple of days ago, I think on Saturday, maybe. Could have been Sunday. I think it was Sunday. Some folks walking around this area of Los Angeles with trash bags, picking up the trash, because lest we not forget, and this is something I want to talk about, maybe if I can find a pen, make a note about, apparently the cleanup of San Francisco has begun, and Los Angeles will follow to some extent, because as we know, Gavin Newsom is apparently going to run for president, and we'll need to, and the Olympics are coming to Los Angeles in 2028 also. And so a lot, actually, folks may not be realize that a lot of what, not necessarily with the immigration, but the just these crackdowns, especially on homelessness that are beginning, and it's not even really homelessness. It's criminal, mentally ill, drug addicts have been permitted to take over the streets for whatever reason, especially in certain cities. Now, that what the pandemic did that I saw, and I don't want to diverge too much from the main topic, but in like Dallas, Texas, and a lot of big cities that were quite strict on the homeless or the street people because of the pandemic, there was a period of time when a lot of those rules got relaxed. But then, simple matter culturally for a lot of those places to crack down because, especially once the recent court ruling came around, grants pass Oregon suing to be able to pass laws and bust up these camps, right? Well, much of the middle part of the country had the camps were hidden. The homeless had to hide, the street people had to hide. But then during the pandemic, it was more or less on display everywhere. There was even tents on the sidewalks in downtown Little Rock, Arkansas, which is effectively an impossibility. In a normal climate, it'd be interesting to pitch a tent on a sidewalk downtown and just set one's watch and see how long it takes for the cops to show up and say, "Hey, man, you're taking that tent down right now." And we don't really care what you have to say about any rights or laws you might cite. Like that motherfucker's coming down whether you do it or we do it. You know. So again, back to the Olympics, and so a lot. It's, oh, do we now see? Because remember, everything's blamed on Democrats, right? It's all, well, the Democrats this, the Democrats that, and even somebody can behave a certain type of way in a YouTube video, and it's like, oh, well, I bet they vote for Democrats, right? As if that's any answer to anything. Because so to approach these topics with actual intelligence would be to immediately remind oneself within their own sphere of influence where their power lies. Well, Republicans aren't going to do anything about it either. Now, outside of the context of what benefits the system, see, seemingly what benefits the system in the short run. Remember, the system allowed the takeover of the streets for its own purposes. And now the system is seemingly cleaning up the streets, not to serve the people. That's an ancillary effect. That's just sort of how it's shaking out in the short term, potentially, although it hasn't even really happened yet. It's because that's what suits the system. So when people blame everything on Democrats, they're doing that because that's what suits the system, not because that's what is going to lead to them doing what's right and proper in their own lives. Because remember, society, and this is the main thrust of this broadcast, society is comprised almost exclusively of disempowered individuals by definition, and they're disempowered by being trained to curse their own blessing, by going into the external realm first, by going into all sorts of confusion, right? And going into complication and sophistication and, into games of lies, and then expected and increasingly willing and going right along with the individual defining themselves in relation to all of these things. And in fact, creating an identity for themselves and seeking to become something, but only in relation to death. And so what is antithesis doing via Moloch's machine? It's creating, although it lacks the power of creation. So having been animated, right, by the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation, see, that's the creative force. Anything that's not one with that force lacks the ability to create for itself. So that's where we get into the animated death aspects of this place. So in an animated death fashion, right, with a garish, ghoulish grin on the plastered to the face of the individual, that's called employment, right? And maybe some people are keeping it real with their facial expressions, but to be employed and to go to a workplace is to, in some period of time, have to fake the funk, or being made to fake the funk and plaster the garish, ghoulish grin. And you know, thank. And so again, if the being is possessed of Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, it's for a king, what may represent a king or the level of a king, to shuck and jive and all thank you, Mazza, right? And all of the nod heading and the, you sure is a benevolent master boss, right? You surely is. And whatever that version is, just in the trope of blacks as enslaved, right? However one wants to envision all of that, right? Uh, that's what's happening, and people are going right along with it, and then your broadcaster's feeling foolish for realizing just how many spiritual attacks have been directed Benton's way by other people in the so-called truth community around notions of, well, you got to go out and be productive. You got to go out here and produce for society, right? At the level of money and business and, the strength of a country, make America great again. Oh, look at what these Democrats are doing in the cities. As if Republicans, as if there's cities that emanate from Republicans that are somehow serving humanity. Well, there is no service of humanity via the political system. The government doesn't serve the masses of people. The masses of people are enslaved to a system, part of which is the government, part of which is the corporations, part of which is the banks, right? Again, Benito Mussolini's conception of the state, right? And as far as the state is concerned, you belong to it, slave. And again, I'm not the one who has spoken, most regularly about this, slave connotation. And some of this is well-worn material by now, right? Um, and that's okay, because it's all about, again, in the context of where at the level of a location does the individual's power lie. So what is the relevance of these concepts? Well, there is no relevance outside of the internal space, and taking whatever is observable and whatever can be attained externally by observing and participating in a delusory realm, and then to bring that into the internal space and then reconcile it, resolve it, work with it, create something sustainable at a powerful level within the individual. And what Benton has created within himself based on his own power is sustainable. See, because what Benton is abundance. What this world of death is the lack of abundance. But again, the inversion is to be told, well, forget about the internal space because it's an abundant world. So go out here, go into the world, grab the bull by the horns, make the world your bitch through the yang form of energy only at the level of assertion, aggression, and dominance. Man will dominate man unto his own injury and get your slice of the pie. So eventually, maybe you can pulled yourself up by your bootstraps to a level of, relax into the feeling of finally being able to kick your feet up uh, and celebrate a job well done with various products and services, and whiskey in a rocks glass or whatever, or a brandy snifter, and the predictive programming around what blissful state of nirvana will the individual externally inhabit after the celebration of a job well done, the satisfaction of a job well done serving a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions on behalf of the lack of abundance represented by antithesis, which makes an enemy of what I am at the level of inversion. And this is the insanity of what human beings are engaging in externally at the level of community and grouping up, the herd mentality, power to the people, strength in numbers. It's weakness in numbers, folks. But how many times will people just, myself included, will just reflexively say strength in numbers? No, it's weakness in numbers. It's no power in numbers, none whatsoever. Now, where two or more are gathered in my name from the Bible comes from, well, when you have two or more individuals who are connected and properly identified within themselves with great power seemingly unlimited power when they come together. See, well, where is that happening? Perhaps Benton has experienced it fleetingly here and there, and it is fleeting. That's not a permanent state. That's not a static state, right? The so-called body of Christ, right? Which is a mockery, of course. The idea of partaking of the flesh of Christ. Ooh, gross. I get ooh grossed around my hygiene and notions around what you really don't need to shower and put all these chemicals on your body at least once every 24 hours. And people, it's actually worse. It's better for one's health to not do that while bathing. On a proper schedule to take care of the skin and such. Well, what's the reaction? Ooh, gross. Well, that's my reaction. Ooh, gross. Right. Uh, yeah. And I've already forgotten what I was ooh grossing. Um, yeah, exactly. Um, to take this place seriously. Well, it has to be taken seriously some of the time. Just the what must be done, right? And then back to the notion from the movie Fight Club to let that which does not matter truly slide, right? Um, this is becoming more and more important. So increasingly, what Benton is viewing as not important is whatever's going on in the external, right? It's all about what's going on in the internal space. See, that's where the power is. That's where the potential is. None of us, and this is not a group, but nobody that would listen to this has any level of power. So let's be clear. Here's the power level to join up with other people externally, except perhaps the context of the two or more are gathered in my name. But that's a spiritual thing, right? So let's just go ahead and set that aside as impossible because so much progress would need to be made. It's going to be a long ass time for most folks, but it's to again embrace disempowerment. So we have another inversion in the king slave, the master servant, maybe is a better way to think about it, scenario is to have a being who was born with the birthright being one with the most super intelligent power and force of love, supreme authority. And for that being, instead of directing their efforts inwardly into their own being within delusion, their own individuated location and space, right? Which is, the sphere, that Benton performs within, is to not go into that power and then to choose freely, right? In some way, choosing to go along, whether knowingly or unknowingly, with inhabiting a state of 0% power level, right? Zero. So what is the relevance of let's say there's one individual who's in a state of disempowerment because they're seeking externally. Okay, well, here comes another person who sees the performance of the first disempowered person. And, humans, we like to be in a community, we like to socialize. Now, some people are a little more charming, they have a little more force of personality, right? So perhaps the performance of the first individual, well, the second individual wanders along and becomes enamored by the personality and the performance, right? And now there becomes the bare bones beginnings of a potential group. So we start with one individual at a 0% power level. Here comes the second individual at a 0% power level, right? So the power level is still zero, and then it's notions of, well, a community and discussing various social problems and oh, the government's trying to jab folks, and how many people, look at how many people, myself included, were able to garner some measure of an audience, right? Although I've garnered audiences before the pandemic at times, but that's neither here nor there. And as more and more people join something that then is akin to a movement, right? Yeah, how can it be a movement if it has no propellant. Because what if something's going to move and live and grow and expand and do the right thing and perform? How is it going to do that with 0% power levels? Would not the power level be the prerequisite? Right. And what we see is individuals have been trained to do almost anything, even to their own detriment, other than explore the internal space and uncover the power within. Right. So a big part of this is at the level of effectiveness is to recognize the folly of such groupings and to avoid them entirely, or participate only at the level of the individual recognizing that they're taking a particular thing from the group and they may be willing to give a particular amount of themselves in order to socialize, have discussions with other people. But then what did we see? What have we seen in the so-called truth community is uh, a never-ending series of looping into external level problem solving with no power, right? What better way to prove oneself foolish and incompetent than to continue to seek a thing that's not possible, to go into an external realm of society and seek to resolve the issues there, but operating from a 0% power level. Meanwhile, there are most assuredly resolvable issues within the individual, and there's a power level in there that could potentially rise above 0%, no matter where the individual starts. Yeah, the individual might begin at a 0% power level inside themselves. Guess what? That can cross over into positive territory. That will never happen outside of the individual. Never. It has never happened. It will never happen. Not at the level, not in the context of being one with the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency. Is it powerful in a dead way? Is it possible from a context of death and animated death to wield power over others in this realm? Yeah, it is. It's called man will dominate man unto his own injury. It's called if you want to know the future of humanity, imagine a boot stamping on Luigi's face forever. See, I made that little change there. Free Luigi, right? So let's make it Luigi's face getting stamped on forever. That's even better, right? It's even more apropos if you ask me, right? And then to develop, for the individual to develop themselves, and not necessarily to deliver a discourse. This happens to be Benton's, office, right? Every man hath not the same office. Not everybody's a born preacher, thankfully, right? And discourser and all of these things. But, you know, part of letting this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, is to, tap into the talent of the individual and to bring forth what can be brought forth. Well, now, what do you mean bring forth? Right. Well, in the context of make the tree good or make the tree rotten, and to be able to tell the difference. And what I observe is a lot of folks who wasted a lot of time and did a lot of damage and are reaping what they've sown because individuals cannot escape the consequences of their actions in this place, right? So the punishment is contained within the incorrect actions, and certainly old Benton here has been made to suffer from his own mistakes and his own choosing to do certain things in the past, to his own detriment, um, and to intelligently manage these processes on behalf of the individual. So where two or more are gathered in my name would be the two or more individuals must be doing those processes on an ongoing basis within themselves. And that's simply not happening, folks. And it's not happening anywhere. It doesn't exist here. And that's probably, I heard, just happened to be watching a video about drama type content and lolcows and all of this. And, this idea that now it's, Mark Maron, the comedian, he's sort of blown the lid off of this idea of Joe Rogan being, the gatekeeper for the comedy space in society. And so I just happened to watch, and I don't watch Rogan anymore. It's been, and again, I was Rogan JRE from literally the first episode. That's not an exaggeration. I was such an early adopter of podcasting or listening to podcasts. I haven't listened regularly in many years now. And kept going on and on about, Kali Yuga, right? Which I didn't know much about, but it's some notion from Hinduism. It would be the Christian concept of the so-called end of days, and the descriptions of what things would be in the end times or whatever, right? The last days. But the Kali Yuga part of it, right? Well, what else would we expect if it's an actual so-called last days or Kali Yuga, right? Well, what I would expect is disempowered groups who, in spite of their best intentions, end up performing in ways that serve evil and serve wickedness and serve antithesis. Now, who are we talking about? Now, oh, wait a minute. What did Saul of Tarsus apparently write that ended up in the Holy Bible? Something about, no matter how pure his intention, he, apparently observed or claimed to observe that, in observing his own actions meditatively, I would take it that seeing that, well, he ends up going into folly and wickedness and error. And then through Christianity, that's been applied to all of the other individuals, as if because this was Paul or Saul of Tarsus's experience, this must be all of humanity's experience on some level. Well, I'm calling bullshit. Flag on the play. Let's review that, because that's a bunch of poppycock. It really is. It's a bunch of poppycock. It's religion as a control mechanism. See, which again, all systems of humankind lacks the ability to create and operate systems that are free from corruption, right? So all religion is man-made. All religion functions as demonic, including Christianity. See, but where two or more are gathered in my name, that's a thing that effectively doesn't exist to the point of why I even talk about it, because of the society of disempowered individuals. Now we see clearly, perhaps, what is the purpose of maintaining society at the level of disempowered individuals. And to me, what better way to represent societal collapse? Because when the individuals that comprise the masses are disempowered, but possessed, at least some of them, of Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. That's the creative force animating the realm of death and allowing the propagation of the game of lies, right? So to see that force subverted proves the disempowerment of the individuals, because they are too busy engaging in externalities to take back ownership of what in the fuck is their creative force doing in the first place. And it's all done under the auspices of, in each new moment, now it's here, now it's gone, now it's here, now it's gone, that whatever that discrete output is, because remember, the creative force of the individual never lies dormant. Something new is always being birthed into the realm, the delusory realm. And the computer simulation aspect is that Moloch's machine, on behalf of antithesis, or at least, some level of the movie The Matrix, there's a computer system somewhere that's logging all of this activity, right, in supercomputer fashion, AI fashion. And each new moment either serves proposition, what I am, or it serves antithesis, or the idea of Satan or wickedness or evil or destruction, right? And that's the spiritual war, folks. And it's individual. This is a wholly individual experience, um, uh, spiritually. And that's why there can't be fear and love simultaneously, because the fear could motivate the individual to, instead of tapping into the power inside of them, right, to then externally group up and to be told what to do, right? And what is that doing? That's giving up the birthright that, or giving up the authority, the supreme authority that their birthright represents. So when you have a society of disempowered individuals at the level of authority, what does that lead to collectively, externally? That leads to a society that is incapable of what? Justice. This society cannot produce justice because of this disempowerment. And who does that serve? What does that serve? Well, it serves antithesis, of course, because antithesis can say, well, if this is all, these little lights of theirs, they're supposed to be shining these lights. right? But look at the condition of society. Look at what's going on in society. Look at the lack of justice. And remember, antithesis is the expert in everything that could be properly said to lack. It understands not justice. Antithesis knows nothing of justice. It knows everything there is to know about the lack of justice. And how else is it qualified to prosecute the case in the context of a devil's advocate movie, a courtroom scene from the movie The Devil's Advocate, right? Or Devil's Advocate. How is it when it gets to pause the game and say, well, look, not even a sliver of light from any of these so-called light beings has shown into the realm in quite some time, Your Honor. So I move I move for a default judgment, right? I'm prosecuting this case, and I move. Basically, the defense has not produced a defense, so I move for default judgment here. They've barely even bothered to show up in court, Your Honor. I mean, this is a farce, right? And here's the evidence. Here's the computer simulation. Here's the AI supercomputer logs. Showing activity over time, right? It's fascinating. And then again, back to solipsism, and there was a certain point where Benton was declaring that day by day, Benton was becoming more and more, a proponent of the philosophy of solipsism. And, whether that's the case or not, keep grouping up and keep delivering yourselves into the hands of the enemy. Right. Well, sadly, virtually all of us were sacrificed to this Moloch and industrial and post-industrial society. And it's not up to us, right? The idea of you still got the majority of the population laboring under the misapprehension that the government is here to work for them, the politicians work for them, voting works for them, economy exists to serve them. No, it's the opposite. From the state's perspective, from the perspective of those systems, you are here to serve those systems. That's your function, slave. And Moloch's machine and antithesis are only interested in doing that to the highest possible value. Right? Now, are there beings who seemingly are attracted to a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions? Absolutely. There's all sorts of entities and all of this. I'm speaking to anything that may be one with the force that Benton knows what he is one with that force. And what do people say? Oh, well, such and such is self-interested, and as is Benton. But, in the proper context, self-interest is very, very necessary and important. To be self-interested is to be identified with what I am as the self, not Benton, the so-called ego, not Benton, the performer, not Benton, the performance and the characteristics and the visual appearance and the biography and, the novel experiences. Those are all dead because those all trace their origins to this world of death. See, none of that is ever alive in the proper sense. That's animated death. Benton's psychology is animated death. Benton's thought process is animated death. Except, well, that's actually probably not even correct, but let's strike that last part. Going to think about that a little more. There's more nuance there. I'm seeing, but I believe the point is made, right? The physical appearance, animated death, right? The history of growing up in a mind control cult called the Jehovah's Witnesses, animated death. A mother and a father, animated death. The nuclear family, animated death. Right. The activities of youth, animated death. Now, the lessons that were learned, right? The Benton leveling up his ability to access his personal power from an early age, his internal power. Well, that's not animated death because that happened in a location called inside. See, it's all in the context of location within delusion. Right. Again, waking dreams, surrealistic notions of unreality, because time, space, location, place don't even exist in the first place, right? Except within delusion, and delusion existing only within the larger indivisible force, which can never exist within a time and a space and a location and a place. It can't be contained there, right? Can its awareness be involved in that? Yeah, of course it can, and that's seemingly what's happening here, right? And again, spiritual genius here on display. Not Benton. Again, Benton just defined all of these aspects of himself as animated death. So, where is the arrogance? How is animated death being arrogant? How is animated death being prideful by speaking on true things? See, how can Benton be bringing forth truth, but oh, well, it sounds arrogant. Yeah, that's a mistake if it sounds arrogant. That's the being improperly identified outside of themselves. What do you mean arrogant? Right. Now, of course, Benton has behaved arrogantly many times. Why am I stammering? Why am I stuttering? I'm not doing that. See, it's even the form of I am, uh, you know, correcting oneself on the fly. I hesitate to speak in that form. Benton, stuttering and stammering. And so back to accessing the power within. So the animated death of playing basketball, but the process of transformation and transcendence by improving through an undertaking or a pastime or a sport, in Benton's case, learning about himself, learning about his own motivations, learning that he can be really bad at a sport initially and then work towards, in conjunction with just certain natural gifts and talents, to work towards, in some way mastering, aspects of a performance and a skill and a sport and all of these things. And then the lessons learned within those processes, that becomes a representative of an internal technology that can then be used to grow and change and evolve and internally bootstrap in other ways in life. And so when I say 15 plus years it's actually way more than 15 years of spiritual practice. It was, not even really understanding that that's what was happening way back when. And again, if it sounds arrogant or egoic, so-called, that's fine. If one's notion, as mine was in the past, not being able to reconcile the animated death aspects, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's great. Your grandfather was an all-pro in the NFL, the animated death National Football League. That's great. Who cares? What's the relevance? What can be done with this? What tool can be fashioned from this knowledge? So now we get into arrogance and pride, when it's just like, yeah, man, I have some of these genetic traits of my supposedly great grandfather, and then we see this ridiculous picture of what he was involved with on some level, whether he knew it or not, right? To sort of bring it full circle there. Take another gander at the. Well, and I glanced at the comments, and good to see Christos. And see, I'll take a little bit, and I know what you mean, so I'm not picking on Christos, Ghostface Chris down there. But the notion of the wage cage, but then calling it the Jewish wage cage, and I'm not saying you're being inaccurate there. Certainly not. And I had my own experience with a Jewish man in the streets here recently. Maybe I'll share that perhaps. And this might run a little long, because I've reminded myself that this is the last broadcast on the free live stream. I'm sorry, the free 20 hours of StreamYard. This is the last one. We're over the 20 now. Experience has shown that they will let that last stream, they'll let it go. So maybe we'll run long anyway, perhaps. I mean, what else is there to do? but the notion of a Jewish wage cage, you're not wrong. However, again, back to the power levels and the internalization and the externalization. Well, what realistically can can be done by thinking that way? Because what I am can never be a victim of a wage cage of any description. And then, how much is a so-called enemy, right? So the realm that makes an enemy of what I am, if the J's, if they're a big part of the weaponry, right? Um, and if Benton understands that what he is a quickening spirit that can always vibrate at a higher frequency, which is what the Bible means by no weapon formed shall prosper, meaning if it's J's and J constructions, right? Jewish constructions, if that's what's happening and that's what's targeting what I am, well, what I am will just vibrate ever faster and the attacks will just, like the movie Top Gun or whatever, the video game, the missiles will just, I won't be where the missile was aimed at. It thinks it had, the heat seeking missile thinks it locked on target, but I've already, it gets launched and then I ain't there no more. It can't even find me and it goes into the sea, right? Explodes in the sea, right? That's what a no weapon formed against me shall prosper means. And see, folks, I've talked to Christians my whole life. They don't know what their book means, right? And I will happily point them to John 15:16. No, John 14:26. The Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, right, will teach you all things. Well, I'm being taught all of this by the Holy Ghost and things being brought unto my remembrance, right? So Christians prove their lack of spirituality because they don't know what the concepts mean. And again, disempowered externally outside of themselves. How could they know what it means? Because they've not internalized any of this. In order to access the power of these concepts, first we have the location within the individual, then we have you know leveling up internally, bootstrapping mind, body, and spirit, which means, hey, I used to love to eat certain types of garbage foods also, right? But what Benton has learned is he can't go to where he needs to go to within himself, mind, body, and spirit, and continue to eat garbage. So at the level of effectiveness, what's the choice? The choice is no more McDonald's drive-through, no more Taco Bell drive-through, no more Uber Eats. If it's fast food, no more bullshit seed oils and unhealthy oils, right? Which means almost everything that comes in a package cannot be consumed. If it's in a box or a bag, it probably can't be eaten by one who's committed themselves. Now, the fact is, a lot of that progress can be made while still eating bad food some of the time. I know because I did it, but eventually the progress that could be made while the physical health was in a certain state and while simultaneously, in my case, stockpiling certain physical items, right? Based on the notion of a Mad Max scenario perhaps happening, right? Well, those two things alone were going to preclude the individual, in my case, Benton, your broadcaster, from ever unlocking the achievement within the game. And then, to be here within a delusion, right, in a realm that's not real, you know, at least not in the way that it asserts itself. If I'm going to be here anyway, why not commit myself to giving the best, most impressive, most intelligent, powerful performance possible, right? Why wouldn't I? If I'm going to, Benton's 50 and has gone through, lots of struggle and strife as all of us have. What's the point of going through all of that? If to not progress beyond a certain point spiritually. To me, that's asinine, acid 10, ass 11. Shout out to Sean P. May peace be upon him. My favorite rapper. And now Benton sits here remembering many points almost made in the last hour and a half or whatever it's been, and that's fine. The audience certainly has the intelligence to fill in some of those gaps. And, you know, there's listeners, way more intelligent than Benton in certain ways and far less intelligent in other ways. Right. Far less intelligent in other ways, as demonstrated by the intelligence or lack thereof of the performance. And that's the relevance of Razvan's most recent video. And I may go ahead and share it on my tab. Haven't decided yet. It's possible. But see, it's the lack of intelligence on display. It's to see that, a being who's very intelligent in certain ways, very unintelligent in other ways, right? Because there's many forms of intelligence. And it's not for Benton here to sort of settle anybody's hash at that level, right? And so my only umbrage with Christos and the Jewish wage cage is that creates a scenario, in my view, that benefits the system itself, because then certain individuals will see it, okay, well, there's this externality called Jewish, and the realm has taught the individual that anything achievable is only achievable through a yang means at the level of assertion, aggression, and dominance. So go out here and smash the Jewish wage cage. Well, that's not the solution. And that wouldn't work anyway. That wouldn't prove effective anyway, because it would be replaced by something else, certainly. Something else would crop up in its place. Nature abhors a vacuum, supposedly. Something is going to be there performing those functions for Moloch's machine at the level of machinery and gearing, whether that can be described as being associated with a religion and a group of people or not, right? And I believe you see what I'm showing you here. So it's the refusal to reconcile the reality of what this place is. That is a mechanism that the realm itself is using via Moloch's machine to incentivize and to cause individuals to procrastinate on reconciling what's going on within their own energy spheres, where their power lies. So as long as the realm has people spinning their wheels externally, that's in some way all it cares about. It's as long as if the person is not working with what they have to work with inside of themselves, then antithesis is served. So in fact, the being's refusal to take ownership, right, and to take ultimate responsibility, and to take to really be the king or the ruler of their own internal space. See, now this is where the Christ consciousness and the Jesus Christ concepts prove themselves to be powerful, right? And make no mistake, Benton's interest is in effectiveness, and it's in order to be effective, Benton is going to need to access as much power as possible in the context of a spiritual war, because again, I understand it was probably the Apostle Paul who wrote about the principalities and all of this and the spiritual wickedness in high places. Well, I'm pretty sure he knew a lot about the spiritual wickedness in high places. Perhaps the Apostle Paul, Saul of Tarsus, perhaps he as a human was representative of such wickedness in high places. Perhaps he served wickedness from a high position. What higher position would there have been than to more or less be the foundation of an entire religion that 2,000 years later, within delusion, is supposedly the most popular religion that there is, Christianity. So assuming that was a pretty powerful dude, right, in the context of spiritual wickedness in high places, principalities and such. See, is it all starting to make sense? So it's to keep the individual disempowered, which is a location. Disempowerment is a location. It's called outside of oneself. Now, is it possible for the individual to disempower oneself within their own internal space? Sure it is. And that's a totally different thing. So the answers and the solutions, it's never outside of the being. It's never outside of the being. So most energies and efforts directed outwardly into the external locations, it's never going to bear fruit. It's going to that's to make the tree rotten. You, the tree will never be made good outside of one's own source of power. So the Jesus stuff, the Christ stuff, is now with the woke kind of falling by the wayside. More and more people I'm seeing just in the general zeitgeist of social media and content. More and more people are referencing, spirituality and even Jesus. I'm starting to hear this, right? In just completely unrelated channels. I'm starting to hear people talk about spirituality and Jesus. Well, again, Satan is happy to preach the gospel of Jesus, provided Satan can preach it in Satan's own way, right? And all of what these people suggest, it all points to externalities and disempowerment. And these points can never be emphasized enough because of the way that every single individual was socialized. It's was done obsessively to always have the individual directing their focus, energies, and efforts outwardly, invertedly, right? So this is a big part of why society is structured the way that it is. This is a big reason why antithesis, when this delusion came into existence, this animated death delusion, that's why everything in this place is based upon business and financial transactions. Because how many hours of the day, how many days of the week is the individual seemingly forced into producing and gathering resources and serving, all of these businesses and financial institutions and the transactions, right? Servicing the transactions. And then what does that preclude the individual from doing? So the system, the individual has been so brainwashed to always identify externally and to always, in fact, to seek to become something in relation to externality. Again, cursing one's own blessing. What I am is, after this process of indoctrination and having been taught to perform all of these things, the discovery process within of uncovering the true nature of what I am. See, the highest form, supreme authority, the source of life itself, right? Abundance, expansion, creation, life. See, and this is practice. It's a series of practices. And what a miracle, right? What a miracle that this has even happened within Benton's death, animated death. Because I can't even properly call it Benton's life. This is not life. This is animated death. This ain't life. What I am is the source of life. But again, what I am can never be contained in this place. So if we talk about this life as a thing that exists only in the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, well, now life isn't even the proper term. It's animated death, this animated death that seemingly lives, right? Well, yeah, a zombie, there's zombies on the streets right now, and they seem to be alive. I saw one yesterday, and I've taken to remarking to myself, well, he ain't dead, but he's not really alive either. He's kind of in between both. Get busy living or get busy dying. He's trying to play that middle ground. He's trying to play the middle. See, he's this some street level drug addict who's in such a just a low state that he's wandering around and he's functionally a zombie. It's animated death. Now, is it that much different for individuals who are sophisticated and they have proper hygiene and their clothes are clean and they have a job and they have a place to live and they have transportation and they're, seemingly loved and tolerated and accepted by society, right? Although it's not love and acceptance and tolerance. It's not that at all. And we've talked about that quite a bit. And that's not life either. That's also animated death, right? as is sleeping in a Nissan Versa and then waking up, and taking care of one's own, you know what needs to be taken care of in the morning time, although not fully in the case of today, and that's okay. But this is animated death, right? So then we get back to concepts of, well, where's Benton's next meal coming from? How's he going to earn money? Yeah, that's all animated death. So who cares? Now, some of it matters in that it can't be avoided entirely, um, or can it? That's the thing. Well, we're about to find out again. To let that which does not matter truly slide, right? Well, that's not something that Benton has fully, explored. That's most likely going to be explored, and probably the realm itself in some way is providing resources to Benton to sort of procrastinate and push off into the future that doesn't even exist in the first place. What new powers and abilities could potentially be unlocked, you know, by leaving the confines of the car, or by there not being a car, where items can be easily stored, to enable, the continuation, to be able to have access to certain supplements and certain foods, and making hot drinks, and even in the summertime, and you know assisting in the great healing that continues to be received. And I do want to point this out. This is the point I was trying to make earlier by referencing um, Razvan's most recent video, is to point out that individuals, disempowered individuals, well, we've had some in the so-called truth community who have seemingly been very powerful, right? And seem to know a thing or two about spiritual powers, right? And should, if they were what they purported themselves to be, should be able to access great levels of healing, but seemingly are unable to. But maybe they have. I don't know. I wasn't around. I wasn't paying attention. Right. Don't know. I'm speculating. Right. And I don't need to be corrected on this account. It's fine. I'm in a thought experiment now, making some points. And certainly there's some folks listening who would have some knowledge of this, I'm assuming. But it's not necessarily to even lack the ability to do that. It's to lack the ability to do that in conjunction with the power within, and the power of the Lord Christ Jesus. The power in the name of the Lord Christ Jesus. Because yes, there was a measure of Benton regaining his health that was performed by Benton, and the fact that the human body, given the proper conditions, does heal itself to some degree. So yeah, there is some credit, and some of the credit for that does go to Benton's performance, his intelligent performance. But how much of that, especially the ongoing healing, right, is attributable to the power, right, accessible within Benton in conjunction with Christ, the resurrection, the resurrection of the risen Christ within Benton. That's what Christ is King means, folks. So as I hear more and more people willing to say Christ is King, well, Benton asked the question, or the question asked itself at some point, okay, King of what? And now anybody that would say, well, this place. Say, well, wait a minute, what? Oh no. Oh no. Surely you don't think Jesus is in charge of all of this. Jesus take the wheel. God's in control. God's in control of this world. That ain't what the Bible say. Show me where it says that in the Bible. Right. And then it's like, well, of course, Jesus and God and all of this would have no, I'm not talking about what they're able to do. And it's not even a they. I'm not talking about what those forces, I'm talking about in a Christ is King connotation. I want to know specifically, what is Christ King of? What I'm saying is Christ is not king of this place. This may very well be the underworld that Christ supposedly traveled through, in between the crucifixion and the 3 days, being resurrected 3 days later in the story of the Bible. Again, I know what I hold to. It's not for me to preach on that part on these broadcasts. It's we don't even necessarily know what this place is, or how it functions on those levels, representationally, in the greater whole. me describing it as delusory and all of these things. Yeah, that's observational, right? And that's also deductive reasoning and intuition, and it doesn't even need to be, strictly speaking, correct. It's correct enough for the purposes of what Benton is doing. Again, now we're back to being self-serving, right? Well, Benton better be self-serving, because again, the to not serve oneself would be to refuse to step into one's power. As much as I don't like the phraseology, to refuse to be self-interested and self-centered is to refuse to step into one's power. That's only achievable through self-centeredness and being preoccupied in some way with what's going on within oneself. Because remember, you are the only one who can deal with that space. No, I can't deal with that space on your behalf. Only you can do those things. Only the being, right? And that's what makes it a wholly individual experience spiritually. And it has to be, because again, it's at the level of delusion that it's even possible to individuate a little chunk of that the larger force, which isn't even possible in the first place, as acknowledged by the Bible. When Christ talked about, was accused of potentially casting out demons, but in Beelzebub's name. Christ is like, well, if hate can drive out hate, then Satan's kingdom is divided against itself, and how can it stand? Which is actually an inverse of the actual, not the actual recognition of God, or the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency. That is an indivisible force. It's always one. If it can be divided against itself, then it can never be what it asserts to be, meaning at the level of proposition or thesis, meaning then Satan's kingdom or antithesis's kingdom would be the valid kingdom. And folks can't even figure that out. And Benton here couldn't have figured that out. Thankfully, the Holy Ghost showed up and taught me. And just in the way that John 14:26 talks about, and John 15:16 is Benton's ordination, because the realm that will always drag the consciousness into externalities wants to know, okay, well, Benton, if what you're asserting is true, who gave you the authority? Benton's ordained. It's John 15:16. Via ordination, via the ordination of supreme authority, sir. That's where Benton gets the unmitigated gall and audacity to declare that Christ is king of his internal space. Christ is king of this energy sphere, this location within delusion. Christ is king of that. Christ ain't king of the external. Mm-mm. That's to curse one's blessing, to say, well, yeah, that's the most super intelligent force and power of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency running the show down here. No, it's not. If it was, this world could not be as it is. This is an impossibility, folks. It's an impossibility. So we see the confusion, we see the traps, we see the snares, the royal we. Again, no groups are being created. See, no truth movements. I was the first one that I'm aware of to talk about the truth movement as a bowel movement, right? And then I combine that with Patrice O'Neill's notion of entertainers and famous people getting shat out of the finding themselves in the belly of the beast, only to be shat out, and then going and getting back in line to get devoured by the beast yet again. And in some way, that is a description of this place, right? And again, what does the Bible say? Seeking whom I may devour. Talking about antithesis, roaming to and fro, seeking whom he may devour, and people signing up and volunteering for that because of externalities and because of taking this place a little too seriously, right? Why so serious? And so we see people who perhaps in the past have, even made their living giving daily broadcasts and talking about spiritual concepts and showing what's going on in the realm, and talking about possibly seemingly community and organization. And then maybe I'm starting to hear that maybe there was some physical challenges and illness, and that's unfortunate. And Benton here, of course, having gone through his own version of that, but presuming that another being, that, and again, it doesn't need to be a specific person, but another being, what is preventing them from allowing Christ to rise within them, that they may receive and bask in the overflowing, right? The worship, the overflowing, the cup running over, right? To be showered in the the perpetual showering within the energy sphere of the most super intelligent force and power of love and creation possible. That is healing. It is by definition healing. So how come Benton can in some way creditably claim, right? And now it's up to the anybody can choose to believe or reject what I'm saying here, but Benton knows that it's happening, the ongoing healing processes, right? And why are other people unable to access this? Well, they prove they prove the intelligence of their own performance. See, they're showing, and if they're showing that the intelligence of their own performance has been lacking. They've affirmed a lack, which is what? Their own actions affirming lack. That's a violation. That's to curse one's own blessing. If one is, um, you know, uh, one with what I am. Right now, there's been a notion of we, whatever that means. Does that mean humanity? Does that mean whoever's listening to it? See, it's never defined, but this idea of air quotes, air quotes mine, we are all one at the highest level, right? Well, then you have as above, so below. So I'm going to go ahead and invert that to perhaps what was actually meant, which is we are all one on the highest, I'm sorry, the lowest level. But I don't even, again, that's a functionality. That would be a society of disempowered individuals, which is what I see. I see a society comprised almost exclusively of disempowered individuals. Again, of course, the world is the way that it is. When the people have no power, when the people, and why don't they have power? They refuse to, if, again, because what does the Bible say? The Bible quotes Christ as, you didn't choose me, I chose you, right? So the chosen ones, and again, that's not my business, that's above my pay grade, but clearly, you know, if depending on the number of chosen ones, and if the Kali Yuga is really a thing, well, that's supposedly part of a repeating cycle where, in these different eras, there's a period of time when, humankind devolves into what more or less is happening in society right now. And it's, of course, only going to get worse. But then, presumably, and again, I'm not asserting that this is valid. I'm using this, to make a point. If it then the age changes, and presumably whatever follows the when the Kali Yuga period ends, I'm just guessing. I didn't bother to look this up. Is some period of great fucking abundance and tolerance and peace and all of these things and love. I'm assuming. I don't know. I don't really know. Because what could possibly end the age of destruction and all of these things and degeneration and depravity? Wouldn't that only be, could that not only ever end if individuals did better within themselves? I mean, I don't know how it could happen. What other mechanism could cause that? Now, religion will say it's because, some avatar of God, since we're speaking in a Hindu context, an avatar of God returned or came and showed the way and, destroyed, contended with the evil in some way. Right. Now, the thing about Christ is the difference, the Jesus Christ example is different in that it acknowledges the personal power of the individual, which is the using the idea of a sacrifice, a spiritual sacrifice. And again, no spiritual surrender equals no spiritual sacrifice. What else did Christ perform other than a spiritual surrender, right? Surrendering himself to what he knew the government was about to do to him in the context of the Bible. So it's a surrender leading to a victory. And what I see is a bunch of people who can't surrender because they've been taught from day one as Americans, never retreat, never surrender. In fact, that was an entire movie, I believe, or a movie series. And then, we have the meme of the frog who's being consumed by the pelican or whatever. But he's the long arms of the frog are choking, they're extending outside of the mouth. and the frog, in the process of being consumed, still won't give up and is attempting to strangle the pelican or whatever. And then underneath that it says never surrender. Well, okay, then never have spiritual victory then. And who is served by a lack of spiritual victory? Oh, you mean the expert in all lack? The expert of lack, antithesis, is probably served. See, do you see the traps? No, you don't. You don't see the traps. That's why Benton has a function. That's why Benton's here, not to fix any of this, not to resolve this, because it's gotten so bad that the person who's able to explain all of this at the level of a spiritual genius or representing spiritual genius, the spiritual genius contained within the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation possible, supreme authority, and on and on and on, however else it may be properly described. It's become so lacking in this world of death that the one person I've heard talking about this, and I understand people say, oh no, other people talk about this. Nobody puts all of this together. Sorry, I'm it. And again, oh, he's sounding arrogant, he's sounding this. Who cares? What does it matter how it sounds? See, and that to me is a sign of the times that the one voice who's putting this all together sounds like me, the smartest person that sounds the dumbest, where at least half of the people, just based on how I sound, won't hear a word I say. It's almost as if antithesis knew to make sure Benton performed in a certain comic fashion and performed in a certain type of way, right, with a southern accent and folksy and mannerisms and comedic body language, right, and all of these things. Well, hey, the people who have the ears to hear will hear, right? And then as Benton continues to tap into his own power, as Benton is able to surrender even more and more of his own autonomy to being ruled within by Christ. How about that? How about that? You want to talk about a master-slave relationship? Get your minds out of the gutter, right? And I'm not sure it's exactly that, but Christ himself in the Bible talks about the power in a master-slave way, where he says, well, if you're talking about the disciples, he says, well, the slave cannot be more, the slave is not greater than the master. And Christ said, you saw what they did to me. What do you think they're going to do to you? It's this Christian notion of to go out here and check all of the Pharisees' boxes, to do what the church tells them, gets a pat on the head, and to completely sidestep the persecution and to having to surrender spiritually, not having to, but choosing to spiritually surrender in various ways, um, in achieving victory, right? What I am is victory. Okay. And again, in conjunction with Christ. See, so so that's your master slave. See, so to serve the master, what to serve what? The thing that I'm already one with in the first place. So is that even a master slave thing? So it seems like the master slave scenario comes from the human psychology, the human awareness, the way things are set up for humanity. Now, what I'm speaking on internally through these spiritual processes and all of this is to transcend those limitations, to rise above. Again, the quickening spirit, just it's able to ascend and rise above all of that, and then to functionally, perform, again, intelligent performance, right, at the level of effectiveness. And Benton gonna put his name on it. See, that's what's going on. That's what's going on. So the thing about the J part of it, to finish up on the point, is, to me, that's sort of a red herring that can drag certain people. And as I myself, spun my own wheels and dissipated my own energies externally, it's to then focus on, directing one's efforts to assertively, aggressively, and in a domineering fashion to go out and smash the fucking wage cage, right? When the answer is for individuals to raise their own level within themselves to where they will no longer respond to the wage cage, meaning they won't show up for it. They won't go there and wage slave, because when the being rises to a certain level within themselves, they won't go there. And shout out to one of my favorite channels, Millennial Steam. He's pointed out that happy people don't work miserable jobs. A person who's, and I don't even like, that's his term, happy, but somebody who's living a life that leads to fulfillment and contentment and actual positivity, they won't go work a miserable job because they have taken ownership in some way of their own internal state. It's an acknowledgement of the taking ownership and responsibility for the internal state. And when the being does that, they don't show up for employment. And what anybody else thinks about the obligation, right? And oh well, you have to be productive. Well, in what context? Because I would argue that I don't know anybody who's been more productive than me over the last 15 years, based on if we look at make the tree good or make the tree rotten, and then judging the fruit, bringing forth the fruit. Who else has done? I don't see it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying, where is it? So productive, I don't know how to not be. What I am doesn't know a lack of production. See another spiritual attack. I'm almost spiritually attacked myself there for a moment. The faintest fleeting moment of improper identification. See, this is observable in real time, and anybody can do this if they're willing to put the work in, and if what they are is what I am. I'm a big believer in the transcendent potential of an individual, and I'm here to tell you, maybe it's achievable without Christ, without the Lord Christ Jesus. I don't know, but I'm out here trying to tap into all valid power sources and authoritative sources that are available. And Benton has found that to be involve the Lord Christ Jesus. And that's the reason for the prayer. That's the reason for working with these concepts. It's effectiveness and power. It's not to check boxes and to please a world of death within games of lies via animated death. Thanks for watching. Bye.